complete change in the investment landscape based on the arrival of inflation, the long overdue point where the dreaded monster rears its ugly head. And this is going to completely change the dynamics that have existed for investors over the last decade. Pretty much everything that worked while the Fed was inflating this bubble is not going to work as the air comes out of it. And the air is going to come out of it, despite whatever efforts the Fed may pursue to prevent that. I think they've already pricked this bubble, and there's really no way to prevent it from deflating. So first of all, to discuss the topic of inflation, the first part of the stagflation equation, clearly we have a huge inflation problem, and we've had this inflation problem for over a decade. It's just that it hasn't manifested itself in a way that was problematic to the Fed or to investors, because the inflation was resulting in asset prices going up rather than consumer prices. I mean, consumer prices went up, but not by an amount that caused an alarm, especially since the government was able to disguise the true degree to which prices were rising with the CPI, which doesn't really do a good job, I think, by design, of accurately reflecting what's happening in prices. It substantially understates the degree to which prices are going up. And so given the ability of the government to pretend that we had inflation below 2%, that gave the Fed cover to continue to create more inflation under the guise of quantitative easing and stimulus and 0% interest rates. But that money flowed primarily into financial assets, but it also fueled a record increase in U.S. trade deficits. In fact, this morning, we got news that the December trade deficit was a new record, $101 billion. That is the first month where we've had a trade deficit in excess of $100 billion. This is merchandise trade, goods. And for the entire year, our trade deficit in goods eclipsed $1 trillion. That is an unheard of deficit. Never before has anything that bad been achieved, by any nation. And so part of that actually kept a lid on inflation, even though the way the government measures inflation, we had a 7% increase in consumer prices. Imagine how much more consumer prices would have gone up had $1 trillion worth of stuff not been dumped into our market by our trading partners. And how did we pay for all this stuff? We didn't. We printed money, and we exchanged the money we printed for the goods that that the rest of the world produced. And Americans didn't even earn a lot of the money that they spent. It was just handed to them by the government in the form of stimulus checks or other bailout money. And where did that come from? Well, it came from the Fed's printing press. We did the worst possible combination of monetary and fiscal policy in 2000 when we first entered, the pandemic, March of 2000, because as the economy was shutting down due to COVID and due to government restrictions as a result of COVID, instead of doing the right thing and contracting money supply along with the economy so demand would go down with supply, the government and the Fed conspired for the worst combination of monetary and fiscal policy probably in the history of the United States. As millions of Americans were leaving work, the government mailed everybody checks to replace their paychecks. But the key is when you're earning a paycheck, you're being productive. You're helping to produce goods and services, and then you're rewarded with pay, and now you can consume some of the goods and services that you help produce. But when you're not working, you need to consume less. But the government didn't want that because that would have meant a more severe recession. So the government sent everybody money to buy goods and services that they weren't producing. And the fact that we have big shortages should not have been a surprise. I mean, it's an obvious consequence of a failure to produce. You don't have stuff and you get a shortage. But we had all this extra demand thanks to the government and the Federal Reserve. And we haven't even really begun to feel all the consequences of that inflation. I think the inflation that we've experienced in 2021, a lot of that was largely the delayed consequence of the inflation that was produced prior to 2020. I don't even think we've caught up to that inflation yet, which is one of the reasons that we're going much higher. You know, not only wasn't inflation transitory, but it's going to be far higher than it was during that supposed transitory period. And of course, I was one of the few people, in fact, at the Money Show in earlier presentations, when the Federal Reserve was claiming that the inflation we were experiencing would be transitory. At the time, I said the Fed was lying about that. I said that inflation was as transitory as the subprime market was contained. That's exactly the lie that the Fed told us in 2007 when the mortgage market blew up, the subprime market. The Fed told us not to worry, that there wasn't going to be a problem, that the damage was contained to this small segment of the mortgage market. It wouldn't affect the overall housing market. It wouldn't affect the economy. And of course, we ended up with the 2008 financial crisis. I think in many respects, people at the Fed might not have even believed those lies, but they told them anyway because they wanted to placate the markets. They didn't want the markets to be afraid of what was going to happen. And I think that was pretty much what they were doing again this time. They didn't want to level with the markets and deliver the bad news about how bad inflation was going to be. So they just pretended it was transitory. Now, maybe they also hope that the problem will go away. In fact, they're still hoping it's going to go away, because if you look at what Powell is talking about doing in order to fight this inflation that it now admits wasn't transitory, is too little too late.
Before we continue, help us clicking that YouTube like button and subscribe now to our channel. This shows the algorithm that you valued this information, and it helps us spread that message. Sharing is caring. And now, let's continue.
Do you want to know one thing about crypto? I made over 3,000% in profit in a few weeks. Fact is, the traditional financial system, the traditional money system makes you poor, not rich. If you want to earn $500,000, $1 million, you have to wait until you're 50, 60, 70 in the traditional financial system, and you probably will still be broke. And you will be old. This is not a sexy combination, as you can imagine. But the question is, how can you start in crypto and make these profits? Where to invest? Where to start? My name is Gunnar and I'm from Germany, as you can hear, and things are a little bit different in Germany. More about that later on. Fact is, there are lots of different cryptocurrencies. It's a gigantic universe where beginners and professionals get easily lost. But there is light at the end of the tunnel. There are 7 key steps you need to follow to become successful in this market. You have to know them, and if you fail one of them, it's literally impossible to succeed in this market. Just an example, one of the key points is your exchange, and one of the biggest are, for example, Binance and Coinbase. These are trusted and well-established exchanges, but, and this is a big but, you won't find the super profitable coins on those exchanges. The unknown super profitable coins that get gigantic profits are not traded on those kind of exchanges. They are traded on much smaller insider platforms that are barely known. And I can tell you what those super secret exchanges are and why they are so profitable. And another super important thing are the right information sources. The point is, the internet is gigantic. There are hundreds and hundreds of YouTube channels, blogs, pages, and much more. And there are also market makers and influencers. For example, Elon Musk, he is not a crypto guy, but the moment he recommended Dogecoin, it went through the roof, to the moon, so to say. But why did he recommend it? Where did he hear it from? He didn't hear it from newspapers. And believe me, he is listening to someone. But you have to know who, and you have to react before he is reacting. This is really, really important. And these are only 2 of the 7 steps you have to follow in order to be successful in crypto. And if you want to know all of these steps in much more detail, and if you want to have a comprehensive checklist, here's what you should do. There is a link below this video. Click on this link and you will get the opportunity to subscribe to my channel. Click on the link and you will see a video where I explain the next steps. So see you soon. Click on the link now. I'll see you there.